All right, folks, thank you so much for being here. We have so much to talk about. I just wanted to really call out real quick before I even get started and introduce Kishore and Neil. I just really, again, just thank you so much for being here. We know how hard it is to get around reInvent. If you are seeing us in yellow badges, you see us like Naruto running around. We just want you to know that we love you and we just really appreciative for you being here. I know some people came from different countries. I think even Spotify's here. They came from Sweden. I know we have some colleagues from Toyota that's from Japan as well. I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you for being here because I know how difficult it can be. So welcome to Elevating the Developer Experience with Backstage on AWS. My name is Brian Landis. I should not do that. And I also have Kishore from Toyota Motor North America, and also Neil, which is one of my colleagues that's been helping us out building out developer portals and platforms. So again, they'll introduce themselves in a second, but again, my name is Brian. I've been supporting Toyota for about 6 years now. So I've been here helping out, doing connected mobility, dealerships, anything that you can possibly think on a cloud journey for a very, very awesome customer. Again, I'm super lucky to be here. And again, they will introduce themselves in a couple seconds. Okay, so this is the flow. So what we're going to do is I'm going to do a very quick high-level introduction to Backstage and why developer portals and platforms are kind of taking everything by storm right now. And then what we're going to do is we're going to shift to Toyota, and you're going to actually hear something much larger and something much bigger versus me just kind of talking about like an open source solution, right? They've done a great job, and I think it's one of those things that like you probably don't want to hear from me, you probably want to hear from him, right? Okay, so what are we doing? So one thing that we're trying to solve with all these different problems and things that we've come into play is that the developer cognitive load. I know this might be a little simple, maybe it's not, but nevertheless though, if you think about it, is that the cognitive load of a developer should be relatively low, especially when it comes to like an enterprise, right? When you come to like an enterprise, maybe even just as a developer, if you're a little bit smaller company or whatever have you, is that basically though is that you should be able to build quickly and actually self-service infrastructure. A lot of times what we see though is that these major enterprises, it's complicated. Things are big. It's just how the world works, right? But sometimes what you'll see is that people put in tickets, or they might request a database, or maybe a VPC, or anything that you might be thinking about from an infrastructure point of view, and it will take you months, almost weeks, and all you're trying to do is just do your job. Another thing is too is that I think one thing that I kind of like to copy from Spotify. By the way, Spotify's here. If you want to go to Expo Hall, they're probably jamming out somewhere. I don't know where they're at right now, but nevertheless, like shout out to Ben, Patrick, and everyone else that might be here. But nevertheless, though, is that basically you put it in a ticket, and it might take you again months, weeks, times, and basically what you're just trying to do is do your job. And also is that instead of having like 15 to 20 Chrome tabs or Firefox tabs open, what if you just had two, right? You have one that was your single pane of glass, and maybe GitHub, GitLab, code commit, whatever may have you, but nevertheless, you want to reduce that cognitive load, especially the context switching. That has always been very complicated, and it's very hard, and it's just kind of crazy, right? You don't want to do that every day. I was told not to show the slide, but I was like, no, we're doing it. So DevOps is complicated. This is what this slide is. It's DevOps, right? DevOps is complicated. And we definitely felt that probably during COVID as well, right? We all went remote. Maybe some of us didn't, nevertheless. But the thing is to do DevOps at scale is you're basically following this flow. I would actually say the technology part is the easiest part. We're all nerds. We love being nerds. But the hardest problem is probably the culture. And so a lot of times with these developer portals and platforms, basically it's just like, what if we had a focal point and we push your entire enterprise through that focal point and we made DevOps at scale, especially from a self-service point of view. But nevertheless, DevOps is complicated. And it's so funny because it's like, even when you read like the Phoenix project and everything like that, like we're all learning still, we're all doing this together, but nevertheless, it's not perfect, but it's complicated. And so that's where these developer portals and platforms are trying to solve. So what are we trying to really do is, number one, again, empower your developers. We build fast, build features, scale, and reduce that cognitive load. Another big thing is too, specifically from like maybe an engineering or enterprise point of view, from a DevOps point of view or a centralized enterprise team, is that maybe you don't need 6,000 different tools, right? And you're trying to consolidate those tools and try to have a little bit more control of the chaos, right? You're trying to standardize, you're trying to automate, and you're trying to make these things more efficient, specifically to whatever environment that your team might be building out. Also too is the knowledge and best practice sharing. I think a big thing is too is like we have noticed that, say for example, I leave the company or whatever have you, how do I share the things that I learned with maybe you, right? Or somebody else that might come in, right? So again, single pane of glass, have everything in a centralized location, and so on. One thing I will say is that we've been trying to make sure that we're not in the wrong direction, nevertheless, right? So we kind of actually brought up Gartner's take. Same situation, right? There's going to be an inner loop, there's going to be an outer loop, and there's going to be an organizational loop. So what we're seeing is that these developer portals can kind of help solve at least a little bit of this, right? It's not perfect. We totally all get it. But nevertheless, like the inner loop, right? Basically having the high frequency and building out while you're writing your code and compiling and testing, maybe from a CLI point of view, also from the outer loop, basically building out your code, standardization, compliance, or anything like that you might see, and then also the organizational loop, right? So that might be onboarding. So like, for example, there's certain customers that will actually test how long it takes to be onboarded. But when you have something like a developer platform or developer portal, you can basically, supercharge that, right? And so basically though, Gartner and everyone else is basically seeing the same thing that we are. So while this all is happening is that there's going to be the rise of internal development platforms. So that's what we're here, that's what we're doing. So real quickly, I will say that, obviously you'll have some type of cloud, right? That might be on-prem, that might be edge, that might be the cloud itself, but nevertheless, you're going to be using some like an orchestration. A lot of times we'll see Kubernetes or ECS, maybe CloudFormation or Terraform, but nevertheless, it's going to be some type of orchestration that would spin up the VMs or containers. And then again, they would probably spin up the same thing that you see the 2 rows above, right? So all the CI, CD, security, tenancy, and nevertheless, basically overall infrastructure. And of course, there's going to be some type of landing zone here. What we're trying to do is abstract all that away, right? Your developers should never have to touch these things. Again, it takes a journey. Toyota will absolutely come in and talk a little bit more about how they did it. Nevertheless, it's abstracting all that away. So there will be some type of self-service interface where basically your developers will be able to self-service infrastructure as code or whatever have you, but nevertheless, again, you're trying to abstract complexity away, right? To basically move fast and be able to deploy. And again, by the way, I just want to mention, this doesn't have to be just developers, this could be data scientists, it could be builders, it can be at all, right? I will say this, I really want to mention this, is like make sure that you are building for developers first, right? Like that's your customers, right? Platform as a product. But nevertheless, when you start building out for different business units, you can slowly adopt different things like data science, whatever have you. Again, you will have some type of team, app 1, app 2, team B, team C, but nevertheless, you're going to be sending them to this focal point of your developer platform. Isn't this guy cute? His name is Bowie, by the way. I love him. So that's why we kind of figured out Backstage. So Backstage is an open source project. I actually helped host or kind of co-hosted with Red Hat from Balaji and also Ivanica from Spotify at KubeCon and BackstageCon. And basically, we're finding now that Backstage is a really, really good way to put that self-service interface on top of your platform. So what are we trying to do? Again, provide a single pane of glass, right? I don't want you to have 500 Chrome tabs. I want you to have 2. I want you to be able to come to your developer portal. I want you to be able to see all your observability. I want to see all your contacts and everything like that. And also the software catalog, almost like a ServiceNow, or basically a central record of location of all your infrastructure. So there's going to be major customers, just like what Kishore will be talking about, where basically it's over 300,000 apps, whatever you can have, right? Toyota's landscape is quite large, so there's manufacturing plants, there's 3,500 dealerships, and it just goes on and on. But nevertheless, having a central location of where everything might be, so everyone can have context. And also one thing too that's really nice about Backstage is extensibility, right? So basically I'm going to talk about a little bit of more core functionality, but nevertheless there's also the ability to have plugins, right? So if you have a plugin, say for example you need Jira, well guess what? You can build a Jira plugin, add it to your infrastructure, and have more of that connectability so that you are building it again. Built by your team to solve your cloud problems. The main core functionality of Backstage, just to kind of talk on very high level, is basically the software catalog, the templates, tech docs, and search. So real quick, just to kind of go a little bit faster, because I think Kishore has way more fun stuff to talk about, is that software catalog is a very nice way to have a centralized location of everything that you might have within the catalog or your infrastructure. So this might be, and by the way, this is all tied to Git. So remember, GitOps is your friend, but nevertheless, you have the context of who's using what team is using what, and nevertheless, how your components and anything like that might be actually working together as one. Neil will probably talk about a little bit about how new plugins that we have, where you can see not only the Git repositories, but also maybe the ability to actually see what AWS infrastructure that you're depending on, right? So maybe you have a React app, but then you're like, oh, am I using RDS, ECS? Well, you can actually discover it within this actual catalog. Another big thing is too the software templates. Kishore is absolutely going to talk about these. I think he has about 40 of them right now. But this is the ability to quickly self-service infrastructure, right? So you can be able to spin up ECS or API gateway, but also build best practices, right? So say, for example, you have a very large company, or you're an SMB, or anybody that's just kind of building on infrastructure, but you can put in guardrails, best practices, making sure that your VPCs don't have internet access, or just any of those type of things, right? But nevertheless, I also want to call out one small thing, which is it doesn't always have to be infrastructure. It could be human interactions, right? What if I need a new Git repository? Cool, make a template. It'll make an API call, make a template, right? I've seen people actually do account vending machines, right? So basically, I might have an R&D team that needs to go and test out X, Y, and Z. They go to a template, fill out the template, put $200 on it, and then boom, they have an AWS account. And when they're done, they probably have another template where they can delete the actual AWS account, right? So always remember, it's not just infrastructure, it can be almost human interactions, or like procurement, if you will. Also, I just want to mention too is the search. So basically, what's really nice about Backstage is there's a very nice search capabilities. We do see people use like OpenSearch and tie to this. There's a couple new connectors now where you can actually tie OpenSearch to say Confluence or anything like that. But basically, kind of what I was talking about of having that central point where everyone comes into, and they use this almost enterprise search to look through Confluence, GitHub, whatever have you. But nevertheless, you're trying to reduce that cognitive load and kind of make it a one-stop shop, right? And also, I do want to mention too that any of these, software catalogs or documentation will be able to be searched through that. But again, one-stop shop, expand it out if you possibly can. Also, I just want to mention too is tech docs. I know it's kind of, who really wants to write docs? But nevertheless, though, the documentation is amazing because basically it helps with onboarding. There's a centralized location. Some people actually will bring their entire Confluence over the tech docs and again, have a one-stop shop. Everything's in Markdown, so you might see like a WYSIWYG. So for example, maybe you have like a more business person that is not very technical but needs to make like training or blogs or whatever have you. They'll make a WYSIWYG. and they'll go add documentation. It's all in S3, it's all tech docs, and it's all searchable, right? So again, knowledge practice and best practices shared. I've shown this before in the last time, but I just want to mention this is kind of what we see a lot. The architecture is not crazy, not going to lie, right? But nevertheless, there's going to be some architecture review. There's going to be a platform engineering team that defines the platform. There's going to be some architecture review, especially from a very large enterprise point of view. You might have like a bunch of architects actually read through everything, make sure it's not accessible over the internet. Nevertheless, you would definitely still keep defining everything. Again, you're going to be some type of cloud on premises, edge, whatever have you. There'll be some type of landing zone, so that might be in Terraform, that might be in Control Tower, and again, you're going to be using some type of orchestrator. So that might be Terraform, CDK, Kubernetes, whatever have you, and nevertheless, again, you'll have Backstage self-servicing any of that infrastructure underneath, and then the platform itself will deploy into different individual accounts or VPCs. Again, I really do want to mention this because I've seen this a little bit recently, is that make sure you're building for your developers, right? That's who your customer might be, and then obviously start expanding out to your builders and data scientists. A lot of times we'll see people have self-service forms where they can come and actually add different ideas to the actual platform so you know what you're building to the platform, right? But nevertheless, this is what we're seeing. So, let's talk about Toyota.
Thank you, sir. Hey, everybody. I'm Kishore Janalgada. I'm from Toyota, North America. So yes, we've started this platform journey about 4 years ago. All right, clicker works. Okey-doke. So a little bit of intro to Toyota's philosophy, or TPS, if you guys ever heard of this, the production system. Some guiding principles: high quality, low cost, and shortest lead time. Core operating models, of course, are reduce MUDA, or what we call waste, and more importantly, Kaizen, continuous improvement. If you know the Supras, so that's the yellow one is the i4, 255 HP, until you drive the red one, which is a 380 HP i6, and the silver one is the silver bullet. It's going to solve all world hunger. I'm not going to talk about that. There is no best, only better IQ Toyota, so that's the principle behind continuous improvement. So how did we get there? So Toyota's systems have been built over time organically. There is a lot of legacy that we built into our factories, into various sales systems. If you ever went to a dealer shop, sure, you probably had one of those. And they were, of course, locally optimized at that time. So I'm talking about 20, 30 years. And of course, hundreds and thousands of applications. So at one point, what we realized is, okay, let's look at, so when I say Genshi, it's about literally going there and looking at how these applications are being deployed and looking at that. So here's a fun math that we did. So there's some method to the madness. So what we looked at is, okay, there's a lot of repetitive work, obviously. People are trying to build apps. They're trying to deploy apps. There's inconsistencies in how you deploy it. Apparently, when I asked the dev teams, hey, how do you deploy a container? I got like 17 different answers. So, pick one. And then, of course, the magnitude of changes, right? Over time, it's not just day one. It's day two is a big thing because, app lives for a while. And the duration it takes for each of these developers. So it's not the same team. There's development. People move around. New people come in. Well, the time it takes to adopt to the environments. When you multiply that by hundreds and hundreds of applications, it's a big chunk of change. So when we talked to the developers and said, what is an application to you? This is the picture that we kind of got, is like, okay, an application to me is whatever fits on my laptop. So it's a database, it's an API. If I'm writing Java, hey, I can compile this thing, it works. Download a Postgres server, and here's the database. But the reality when the rubber meets the road is, guess what? There's a whole lot of DevOps pipelines that's there. There's a whole lot of expertise that is needed. You can't just log into a database and start doing things. There's tools that actually get you there. Same thing with the cloud. Who here starts writing IAM as the first thing when you're hired as a Java developer? So please don't raise your hand. So I'm just kidding. So it's one of those challenges. So where do you and who here is thinking observability as the very first thing that someone asks you about this? I mean, not until there's an outage and somebody says, well, I don't know, gee, we didn't log that thing. So those are the kind of things that kind of actually come together, and that is what we were trying to set out. I mean, he was talking about cognitive load and reduction of cognitive load. This is what it is you don't have to be an expert on the right-hand side and on the left-hand side itself. You got frameworks and tools. You don't write hello worlds anymore, right? We got to have some interesting framework that kind of gets us there. So that itself is cognitive load, and then on top of that, there's all these other things that you got to do. So what we thought is, how do we make this sync? This is I'm talking 2021, is back when platform engineering wasn't coined as a word, is when we started doing platform engineering without realizing it is platform engineering. But then eventually, of course, we realized that, hey, we are actually building the exact same thing that is part of platform engineering. So discoverable content. So people do want documentation, interesting stuff. How do we get from point A to point B? If I want to build an application, I just want to understand, how do I get my cloud account? How do I get to compile and deploy? What are the processes? And it'll be great if there are reusable components, but there's got to be a consistent, trustworthy, reusable component place and compatibility. So some of the, when I say compatibility, I'm talking about governance and security and all of those good things. So with the mission, so what we said was, okay, how do we make it simple for product teams to build products? I mean, what we want is good business products coming out. Not necessarily saying, hey, we're an expert at AWS. So this is where we started building the platform. Now, if you take a platform and slice it and turn it around, this is how we look at it, the triangle. So the technology, the people, and the process. So, by technology, I mean using the right technology in the right place. For example, we were using the developer portal. Thank you, Backstage and Spotify. For the awesome job. So we are very early adopters of that, plugins and the beauty that built in, the golden paths, which I'm going to talk about a little bit. We call them blueprints. The pipelines that help actually applications go into production. And of course, we got to sprinkle some Gen AI, right? That's the thing. And then there's a contradiction of Gen AI is going to be people or process and technology, but we'll get there. The people, the developers, they've been doing one way. Now, if you're, doing something interesting, what you want to create is a comfort zone. So you don't create what psychologists would call reactants. So people will get closed up and say, hey, you're pulling something very comfortable for me. I want to be trusting your product to use it. So we have a community built thing. We have consensus building. We call it Nemawashi at Toyota. And we have standing clouded hours very frequently, every weekly, in fact. We have products, which I'm going to be talking about in a minute, that are well documented. Like, it's just like any open source product. We treat our internal products with the same rigor and say, okay, if someone is trying to use something like a blueprint, it should have enough documentation to get going. You don't need to call up somebody to get this going. And of course, community best practices isn't like, we probably can't solve everything out of the air, but there is a developer community. There are other smart people in the company, so let them contribute back, and blogs and whatnot. And of course, the processes, right? The planning. So you got to build a mechanism so that this is natural part of building projects and building software. So during inception, during planning, I'm talking about budgeting, and even there. So you're right there. There's a mechanism to create hooks so people understand how to get to this. And if I said just platform, not many people would get it. So the first thing we did was we created a brand for it. We call it Chauffeur. And that's it goes off of the autonomous driving program that Toyota has. The English spelling is too long, so it's the Spanish spelling. Chauffeur, C-H-O-F-E-R. So, and then we made sure that, hey, our finance guys and everybody came in to the loop of what we're trying to do. So FinOps is a big deal. You all know that. And compliance and audit is definitely a big one. All right, so this is not a 101 course, so we're going to pop the hood and see how we approach some of these things. What does a platform team look like, right? Sure, you need some of those subject matter experts. I'm sure they'll be looking very proud when they see this unicorn picture in there. So, and then there's strong leads, right? When they speak something or there's a vision set, there's obviously leadership that need to execute that, the engineers that need to execute that. There are obviously team members that need to support those engineers that are also going to be executing that. But the numbers it's just an intent, it's kind of like a pyramid. And of course, you need strong technical managers. This is the product and the platform that we're building is for engineers. So we want our managers also to be strongly technical, so they understand their strengths and weaknesses. And most of all is a technical product manager who's actually treating this as a product. So because the job doesn't end on the day one, once we launch this platform, it is a continuous improvement, just like any product that comes out. And of course, with all of that, AWS is releasing new features every year, so we got to keep up with those skills. We got to say, what is good, what is not, and when do you use things, best practices, learn fast, fail fast, and of course, communicate well. So you got to hear and talk to other application teams. So these are some of the skill sets that we've kind of nailed on into our platform engineering team. If you have those, for sure we'll be hiring. So contract with customers. So remember when I said, hey, there's a left-hand side and the right-hand side, and you guys need to come together. So this is where excess code. So when we start putting a vision that says we don't want to be in the middle of everything. We want to give stuff as self-service. That is a fundamental requirement of a platform. And we want to put those guardrails and security rails and those automatic upgrades that happen in day two. Like, people start off on an old version of EBS. Suddenly there's Graviton 3, very beneficial. It shouldn't have to require 6 months of talking to people. It should just be blended into the code, and somehow everybody gets it. So access code, and then of course, don't forget the SLAs, SLOs, and Is. So service level X is one of those things. So these are all part of that contract when we give this. So when we give out the solution, it encompasses the entire thing. So a little bit of how we structure the teams. Remember, I kept talking about product teams, and we took a page out of our team topology book, if you ever read it. So it's an amazing book. So product teams for us are very critical that focus on specific things. For example, the Chauffeur portal is a product team. Think of two-piece teams that are building stuff. And the same thing, the developer experience pipelines, that team is a product team. But they are very focused. They have their roadmaps. There is no overlap. There's single responsibility for each product. So if you ever wanted to deploy a blueprint, which is another team, and it's building IAC, it is not going to be automatically deployed into the code. It's going to go through the natural way of any developer, which is in your Git, PR, and you go through the entire process of regular release that you do normally. So product roadmaps that are published and updated, and your OKRs line up to that, and your JIRAs line up to that. And then the products, of course, hold on to those contracts that I just mentioned. SLAs that need to be published that says, okay, this portal is going to be up, this is the uptime, and then this is when we're going to fix, how long it's going to fix our P1 bugs and P2 bugs. Product lifecycle, of course, is very important. Like if there is a new feature coming in from AWS, suddenly there's a serverless version of something, when will we get that into a blueprint? There's a life cycle to this that is published. And most of all, we do encourage our product teams to participate in talking to the actual users using this thing. That is, we call it the evangelization. It is not their primary job, it is one of their job. As engineers, you're right there listening to the developer that is using it. He's a fellow engineer who's telling you something that, hey, is this working, is it not, or is there any improvements? So that is one of the key things that we request, or we have all our developers. And then, of course, the enablement teams. Remember the subject matter experts I talked about? So these are some of those guys that are actually talking, they're forefront. Right there is somebody's planning for next fiscal year budget, and they're trying to do something. And these experts are the ones that are trying to help out, saying, hey, here's this nice blueprint which is going to help you save a good chunk of time. So maybe your budget need not be as bloated as what it should be. So this is right there from that beginning. And partner with the application teams. It's not like you bomb them in some exec meeting. You actually talk to these guys. And these nemawashis are those consensus building sessions that we have. And educate the teams on the new learnings that we're getting ourselves. So and of course, our architects migrating whenever we migrate off workloads off of on-prem to the cloud. Those are expert teams and SREs. All right, let's look at the process. So the process, wanted to put it out there because there's a whole lot of things that we can go in there for process forever. But finance, like I said, bring your finance guys in so they understand how these, we're a 100% chargeback shop. So we pay the bill, but then we also give it out to the business unit. So if you're a showback or a chargeback, doesn't matter. Ultimately, money matters to every single company. So if it does, you need to bring in your finance guys to understand how OpEx works and how, it's different than your old school on-prem hardware purchasing, and build in that FinOps process and build in the planning. So everybody's aware of how these things work. What are the timelines? Because there are specific timelines before which you want to submit this. Engineering processes are like, you will know, there are so many times we get these requests where, hey, can I just go into the console and clickety-click? And the first thing is like, sorry, let's talk code. Unless this is going to take 6 months or whatever, code automation first is the way to go. And that applies for my own team that wants to do, I want to onboard some accounts in here, or I want to do something else. Okay, code first. So, and let's make sure we have that conversation, and without which you will not go in and click ops your way through. And of course, well-documented services. This is a must. Every service or every product that we release, it has its own documentation. It's not a surprise how to use this thing. And getting into product management, like I said, it's a very key part of talking to our customers. So like any product, if you ever bought out there is an important part of declaring the vision. We had a simple vision that says, hey, we want to provide a self-service way of adopting the cloud with all security and cost optimization. And that is essentially what the principle behind our platform is we want to make sure we hit that vision. And how do the roadmaps line into that? Evangelization is, you have to have your NPS. You have to understand if there are any pains on a continuous basis. So get feedback. Voice of the customer, and similarly tech radar, as in like if somebody's trying to do something and somebody else has already done something else, like let's make sure it is documented in a tech radar so it's visible. And some of these things are like right there as plugins. It's just a matter of adopting the process and updating that thing. And day two, of course, let's not forget that education is part of this whole thing. And it's not just platform team trying to educate. We bring in AWS guys. Sometimes we partner with them to say, hey, here's something that you can start off with. Let's say you're talking about ECS. Then we blend in to say, how did the other teams use it? What blueprints help you get there if you were to do it right after this talk? So it is a partnership with multiple experts to get the job done. And most importantly, the network effects is we encourage people to come back and contribute in blog posts and whatnot. So people can look at this and say, oh, okay, somebody has used provision versus serverless, but these are the findings, right? This is when you would want to use this is when you would want to use serverless. So they can have a conversation going on. So, and most importantly, understanding that it's a shared responsibility. Like from a process point of view, understand that we build a blueprint, you would understand you have to code it in such a way that you can use it. And same thing goes up the chain for all of these things. Okay, let's look at the portal a little bit. I mean, talking about Backstage, why not? What is our view of the portal? Well, this is Chauffeur portal. This is the first time we're kind of showing the single pane of glass. So, and there is, the way we look at this is an opportunity to have that single pane of glass to a source of multiple systems. Like for example, there is a security scorecarding mechanism, but we just want to give you a glimpse of what it looks like. You want to go and get more details, you click that, you go into that source. Same thing with the cost and how the trend is happening, and there are more detailed cost tools and graphs. Budget, how is it doing? It looks like it's green and we're doing good here. But the more important thing I wanted to point out is there's a whole slew of stuff that is on that black bar out there. Those are all plugins. Those are all plugins, and that is your power, and that is the power of Backstage. And these plugins can be customized in the ways that adopt to your organization, and then you build that ecosystem to bring everybody in. So one of those plugins is blueprints. So these are our golden paths that I was talking about. Like for example, here's a blueprint I'm talking about, which is an ECS blueprint for deploying Spring Boot. I mean, it gives a whole lot of code. It's about 12,000 lines of Terraform code in there. It's all ISC. Then on top of that, there's some lambdas to help out with some authorization. So it's not just ECS. We're talking about the entire architecture of API gateway, firewall, you name it. A whole lot of IAM in there, so and whatnot. And if a policy changes at some point of time, it's just a matter of updating this blueprint and releasing version 2, which gets into a pull request into all those guys who have used this blueprint, because we already know that in Git. And the way it happens is as soon as you hit that create button, there's a few entry fields that the teams fill in, like what their account number is and whatnot, and then ultimately it's a PR into their Git so that they can take it forward from there. And one important thing I want to point out is the well-architected score. I mean, this is where we're partnering with our security guys and other teams outside the platform team to make sure there is a well understood and a well-architected score that is published with all the stars in there, and that meet the necessary criteria for the ecosystem. So there are, for example, there are tools that will monitor runtime. There is other tools that we use to do observability, and this blueprint adheres to all the various checkboxes in there. Here's another big one, which is the catalog. So hundreds and hundreds of applications. So one of the things we do is there is, of course, a CMDB, which has some static view of the catalog. But then we also have the dynamic view of the catalog. So for example, in this page, I'm saying, hey, this is the team that did this, by the way, but their code, there's a CI/CD pipeline, this is the latest status of where things are. But here's the team that actually did it, that checked in the code, and the group that is checked in Git, so that they're the source of truth. So even if somebody didn't update the CMDB, which is outside the normal realm of developer activities, we automatically get everything together. And the dependencies, like somebody started using this API, there is a dependency that automatically gets in and linked to this. So we're kind of merging that static and dynamic view of the universe to create this catalog. And of course, it is searchable and all of that good stuff. So you can search it through the various parameters. And this is one of the most popular plugins that we've built. And this meets our customer needs. So we kind of customize this from the default one that Backstage gives it. So this is used by both our non-technical guys, like the finance guys, and the technical engineers, and including executives. So you can have different personas, and the view is going to be catered to you, depending on your size of responsibility. You can filter by accounts or by your persona. There are various things you can play around with. Timeline, of course. But most importantly, there is some intelligence that's estimating your trend line and saying, hey, at this rate, you're probably okay, or you're probably not going to be okay, right? So, but that's important because as soon as it's not a surprise at the end of your fiscal year, you're suddenly out of money. So you know how this trend line is happening. And there is a corresponding email that goes out every month too that says, hey, here's a glimpse of what it looks like for you guys. So, and we're also sprinkling this with a little bit of Gen AI and throwing some insights saying, hey, you have about 50 accounts and 5 of those are now trending a little hotter than what they did in the last few months. So that kind of helps trigger that dialogue between our leadership. And it doesn't matter whether it's a chargeback or a showback. I mean, the information is there, and of course, the insights, which is very important. And last but not least, the training and the blogs, right? So you do need this for, like, if it's a 2-minute video or a quick article, FAQs and whatnot. So if we have our own channel we use Teams, so Slack channels, be it whatever. But when the questions come in and becomes a pretty interesting common problem, it becomes an FAQ automatically, so people can just search it. And in the search bar, we use OpenSearch too, and you automatically get to find, oh, this is the more popular one these days, or something got added that says, hey, this is what it is. And our content is different, is separate out from, the content publishing is separate out from the actual software publishing. So there's whoever can write the FAQ, they should write it and publish it right there with a quick review in a separate repo. But it gets pushed out as soon as the review is approved. And these are kept up to date. So it's not like, we write a video and then walk away and then 6 months down the line, that's irrelevant. So, it's important that we continuously make sure the content is up to date so that, whoever comes in is actually able to use it right away. And a big thing here is every page, I don't know if you noticed those icons in there, but that lady with the speaker, the phone, is the support. So it's more context-sensitive support. And we saw that, hey, once we provide the right level of support, the number of questions went down and the adoption was easier. So ultimately, you're trying to make the developer's life easy so they don't deviate too much out of their thought process and they just get to use whatever they wanted to use. The how-to links and the documents. Let's pop the hood. So here's the wires going, the blue wires and the red wires connecting things. Again, once I saw Brian's diagram, I was like, okay, I got to simplify it. So this is the simplified view of that. But you see that it uses mostly well-known Backstage models. Like it also uses a blueprint that is published for others. So we do drink our own champagne, and we make sure that our own teams, our own product teams, are using the same blueprints that others are using. The database, the RDS blueprint is a blueprint that we published for others. Same thing when the upgrades happen, we know it firsthand how these things are working. So that is just part of the equation. And here's the last thing I wanted to close out with. We introduced Chauffeur Archie, which is our Gen AI bot. So for things like how do I find solutions? Do you even have solutions for my problems? This is where it's trying to help developers get to the necessary blueprints or necessary documentation. Because once you have a huge documentation, it becomes difficult to search. So this is how we're gravitating folks. And that link in there, the ECS blueprint, is actually going to take you there. And this one is a quick screenshot of, obviously, what does it cost me to do this, right? This is actually going off of the data that we have with others using these blueprints and with various varying workloads. And it has some information on, okay, it can range from so-and-so to, that value, what others have used. And solutions for, like, if somebody says, hey, you gotta solve this, sec 0, thing. I don't know which one to use, so you go find out, and then it shows up in there that says, hey, there are some blueprints in there. So we're hoping the developers are going to start using this. This is fairly new that we're launched. We're using Bedrock underneath to get this thing going. And to close out, these are real numbers, guys. So once we came to the realization, once we had the adoption, of course, it was a journey where we got all the teams together. Once we got this journey, there was a big chunk of change that was in savings. This was actually saved and given for revenue-generating products that eventually went out this year. So and 40+ approved templates. So it's not about the large number of templates, but it's the quality of those templates, right? I mean, your RDS has several things in it, including HA and DR and whatnot, with a simple configuration without having to think about VPCs and whatnot. So we try to keep the templates tight, but we keep them rich. So they're there. And long story short, the inception is 12 weeks of saving time, and that's direct feedback that we got from our developers that said, hey, there's 12 weeks of saving time, and the teams that were early adopters also benefited from the upgrades that we kept going, and that was about 40 weeks. So you're looking about 52 weeks worth of savings across the board. So if you add up with 4 developers, that's a lot of money. So if you're an org, that is something you'll be very interested in. All right. You still awake, man? All right. Thank you so much. That's all I had.
All right, yeah, good morning, everyone. So I'm going to close out by drilling a little deeper on the Gen AI part. Now, I know that everywhere you've looked this week, you are seeing those last 2 words. Why are we talking about it here? Simply because, like Kishore talked about, we're starting to see this coming up repeatedly. It's one of those areas where, as a container specialist myself, I talk to a lot of EKS customers, ECS customers, people building platforms, and the fact is that people are starting to do this in the wild, right? They're starting to do what Kishore has shown, applying Gen AI to platform engineering use cases and trying to solve problems there. So what we're really looking to do is take all those possible use cases that you're being told you can use Gen AI for and distill it down to a couple of, I think what we're seeing, recurring use cases specific to platform engineering, which I think Kishore showed us, right? Enablement, getting developers to the answer that they need for a specific question when they need the answer without having to trawl through a bunch of documentation to find what they need to solve that problem. And the second one is issue resolution. So it could be operational, it could be security, it could be cost, just in a similar vein, getting them to a resolution on that issue quicker and being able to solve them without a bunch of work and effort. Another example that is quite fresh, one of our other container SAs just caught up with Cisco. Don't worry, the QR code will be in the slides, which will be attached to this session afterwards, so you can grab the QR code there. Like Kishore has showed, they've got a great tangible demo on YouTube that you can watch with one of our SAs. I really recommend you go and see that. They're doing all sorts of stuff from creating Jira issues, creating GitHub issues, helping understand questions based on knowledge bases, a whole bunch of stuff, which is a great example for you to take a look at. So specifically, why is Backstage useful for what we're talking about here? There's lots of ways that you could put these capabilities in place. What do we get from Backstage? So the first one is the catalog that we showed has, if you build it right, a ton of knowledge about workloads, your developers, your teams, and importantly, how they relate to each other, which gives us a great amount of contextual information that these models can use to give you better answers. The second one, all those plugins that we saw earlier. It could be reaching into all sorts of parts of your platform. Again, that gives us some very interesting capabilities that we'll see later. And finally, your developers, ideally, should be in your portal already, right? They should be using it, ideally daily. If they're not, then we need to get them there. But it gives us a great place to build this stuff out where they should already be rather than throwing it somewhere else. So a lot of customers that we see are going to start with something really simple. And this might be where they stay, right? Chat interface, ask a question, get a response. So how would we actually look at implementing this basically in Backstage? So we're seeing a couple of plugins pop up in the wild. This would be pretty simple, right? We'd use the extensibility of Backstage to build a front-end plugin, a React-based package that would essentially expose out that interface to the browser. User creates their prompt. That plugin sends it to a Backstage backend plugin, which would maybe add something like a system prompt for some extra context, maybe adds the user identity, and it would take all of that, aggregate it together, throw it off to a model on the back end, so for example, Bedrock, and then we get the answer back to the user. So in terms of actually using this to solve a real-life problem. This is a demo plugin that I've had lying in my back pocket for a while that we use to show how you can use Backstage and AWS together. It exposes out security hub findings. So this would be a tab for your specific workload. So we're seeing only the findings for our particular application here. So it distills that down to something that's useful to developers. And it pulls this from the Security Hub API directly on the back end, right? So these are not going through any sort of aggregation. They're coming straight from the API. What we're going to do is we're going to say, as a developer, we have to solve this problem, right? We have a high severity security finding, which, God forbid, we've allowed our ECS container to run without with read-only file system access, which is something you should probably fix. But we need to figure out how to do that. So using our existing simple architecture, we get some basic capabilities, right? We can ask a question, we can get an answer, but let's break this down a little bit to see if it's really giving us something that's useful. So the most annoying thing about this is that I've basically had to take my task, build a prompt, copy and paste information from one screen in Backstage to another, and I've lost a lot of the context that I had, right? I don't know it doesn't know which workload I'm talking about. I've had to tell it it's ECS. I've had to tell it I'm using Terraform. In this case, is what I'm using to build my infrastructure. We've had to kind of do a lot of stuff here, which is not ideal in terms of the question. In terms of the answer, this answer is correct, right? If you applied this answer, then you would fix the problem, right? It would get us there. But the problem is, in our fictional scenario here, our platform team, like many that we've talked to, has created some prepackaged Terraform modules for us, for our developers to use, right? They don't interact with the Terraform provider. So although this answer is right, as with a lot of sort of tools that you'll see that sort of take a basic approach to using these LLMs, it's right, but it's not actionable. We can't use it. It doesn't reflect our platform. So ultimately, it doesn't matter if it's right. We can't use it. So we need to be able to do something better here. So I heard Backstage being called, I think it was a Nexus system at Backstage Con by somebody who was also talking about this topic, which I think is a good, I happen to have this diagram already, so it kind of fits pretty well. Backstage is reaching into a lot of stuff in your platform, or maybe not if you've configured it, right? The plugins, between the core features like the catalog and search, tech docs, it might be showing your CI/CD pipelines, right? It might be showing cost information. It's got hooks into a lot of places, and that's a lot of interesting information that we can potentially use to get better answers. So one of the approaches that we've been exploring is augmenting the base models through, say, like a Claude through Bedrock, by using what we call tool use or function calling. So there's lots of different ways that you can add context, right, to these models. There's retrieval augmented generation. There's model fine-tuning. We've chosen to look at tools because it gives us some really interesting properties. And in this model, or in this mechanism rather, the models are taking more responsibility for identifying the extra context that they need and figuring out where they can get it from. And it can also take actions on our behalf. So we're seeing people exploring this particular mechanism. And essentially, compared to our old approach, we take the prompt, we add what we call tool definitions, which is essentially a set of stuff that we can do if the model needs us to. Then we package all that up, we send it off to the model, and then the model will apply something like chain of thought, where it breaks down our task into a set of steps using the fact that we've told it we can do stuff for it. And then if it needs us to perform one of those actions, it'll come back to us and say, I need you to call that tool that you said you had for me, right? So that could be calling an API, doing a search, fetching the weather, creating a GitHub issue, whatever it is that you need. And then we give the model back the response, and then it iterates through until it gets to its final answer, and we send that back to the user. Now, this is a very powerful mechanism that some models are capable of doing, right? So Claude is a great example of a model that can do this, as well as Nova, the model that we just announced this week at reInvent. So in terms of what this looks like in Backstage, we would essentially implement tools into our architecture. And what we're saying is we're going to expose those plugins to the model. We're going to tell the model that we have all these plugins to all this great stuff. And if the model needs us to search the catalog or search our documentation or retrieve our Jenkins CI/CD runs, we can do that for it. And that allows the model to construct answers to questions based on all those great integrations that we already have through Backstage, the open source ones, the ones provided by Spotify, for example. This gives us a whole bunch of capabilities here. So if we revisit our task after we've added this new architecture, what do we get? We'll break this down a little bit more. So the first thing that we've been able to do is the question is completely different. Firstly, I can ask about my microservice, right? I can say my cart's API microservice. I've not told it I'm using ECS. I'm not told it anything about Terraform. I can reference things directly in the catalog in my question. And the second thing is I can tell it to search Security Hub. I can reference just the findings. I don't have to copy and paste information from one place to the other. In terms of an answer, again, it's going off and literally just reusing my existing plugin, calling Security Hub, getting my findings, and then it can use that to figure out its answer. And that's real-time data, right? That's actually been retrieved from an API. We've not done any sort of RAG to put that into a knowledge base or anything like that. It's coming straight from that API, which makes it pretty easy to build. And lastly, the answer. So the answer now is sourcing from the tech docs in our Backstage, where we've added all of our internal platform documentation, and it is referencing my custom Terraform module in the answer, right? So this is an actionable answer, where I've exposed a flag where we can set it to use a read-only file system, and this both is correct and actionable compared to the answer that we had before, which we couldn't put to work because our custom Terraform module doesn't work that way. So what we've been able to do is take all those tools, use Backstage and all the integrations that it has, and build an actionable answer that's a lot more relevant to our platform and our users, rather than just relying on the built-in knowledge of the model. Now, one of the other things that we've seen customers do is try to dodge the whole topic of prompt engineering, right? Building these prompts and asking these questions can be quite difficult to do well. It takes practice, takes experience, and prompt engineering is hard. You've got to think about a lot of stuff. So one thing we've also seen folks start to do is build Gen AI into flows in their Backstage. So rather than using a chatbot, you add a button straight into your plugin, and that might just pop up actionable response straight in there. So some of you might have seen this in Amazon Q in the console. You have that troubleshoot button that you can press that will pop up an answer without you having to type it into the chatbot. And we've seen Backstage users building this themselves internally. This way, the users don't need to understand prompt engineering. We can provide a structured response where the answer is both actionable, but also potentially easier to understand. And we can implement all sorts of interesting stuff like caching and other things on the back end, because it's a lot more of a direct approach that we've taken here. So we're going to be releasing this plugin this week on GitHub as part of our AWS community repository. It will give you that basic chat assistant flow that you saw there, give you some tools to build those directed flows that you can bake more directly into your Backstage. And this will give you all sorts of interesting capabilities, which could be another half an hour in and of itself. But we're hoping this gives people the opportunity to start to use this as a quick start to see if Gen AI and Backstage or platform engineering is something that they want to explore, and if it's worth investing more, right? There's folks like Toyota that are taking much more substantial investments in building these architectures out. But this hopefully is going to give you a quick start where you can try it out and see if it's something that you want to continue to explore. So I think now we can just quickly go back to Chauffeur for some takeaways and then wrap up.
All right. If we got all the 20K steps and more than that, and then hopefully more than this, these 3 takeaways, along with those 20K steps, is golden for you. All right, self-service being part of platform strategy. That is a fundamental thing. I mean, if you ever go there, like I said, automation first, self-service. Do not try to be that central team that everybody should come talk to. Network effects, this is very important, where we actually went and talked to the teams that did the work, get that expertise in, blend it into the product. And most importantly, continuous improvement. So no product is one and done, so there's always a day 2, there's always a day 2 going on. So that's the long pull, make sure that is there. So hopefully, these are the key takeaways that you took out of this talk. Very happy to share all of this with you guys. Thank you.